Welcome to WCG Talks Trials, the podcast where we dive deep into the world of clinical research, sharing the latest trends, insights, and best practices from experts across the industry. In each episode of WCG Talks Trials, we'll explore a different area of the clinical trial industry, while featuring a diverse range of clinical research and medical professionals. If you're passionate about advancing clinical research, improving patient outcomes, and driving healthcare forward, then WCG Talks Trials is the right podcast for you. We are so glad you could join us today.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sandy Smith, Senior Vice President of Clinical Solutions and Strategic Partnering at WCG, and I am excited to be your host for today's episode, highlighting the recent Florence Healthcare Research Revolution event and its exciting takeaways. Before we dive in, though, let me remind you to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on your favorite listening platforms like Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Spotify, so you never miss an episode of WCG Talks Trials. Today, we've got some super exciting people to share their perspectives about the research revolution as well as other things going on in the research industry. Joining me is Lauren Sobocinski and Andrea Bastek. Thank you both for joining us today. But before we get started, I'd like our listeners to know a little bit more about you, what you do, and maybe how you got involved in clinical research. So, Andrea, perhaps we can start with you.
That sounds great. Thanks so much for having me, Sandy. I studied biomedical engineering in school, and I wanted to be very close to the sort of intersection of research and development with the actual implementation with physicians and patients. So I stumbled my way into medical devices and then into clinical research within medical devices. And I did that for a long time before coming to Florence. So it's super exciting to be in this space. And I feel honored to have had such a fun career.
And your title at Florence is Vice President of Innovation.
It's a very fun title that includes a lot of things, a lot of strategy, future product strategy, partnerships. So happy to be on the phone with you, as well as industry outreach, networking with other companies, discovery, and a lot of listening, to be honest. A lot of listening to hear what our sites telling us their problems are, what's going on in the industry, what are people struggling with, and all of that gets to influence our future product strategy. So it's a fun role here.
Perfect. You sound very enthusiastic about what you do, and we're grateful to have you.
Okay.
And then my WCG colleague, Lauren Sobocinski. Lauren, tell us a little bit more about you, what you do, and how you entered the research industry.
Yes. Hi, Sandy, and thank you for having me today. So my role at WCG as part of Strategic Alliances is really to be that connective tissue between our largest sponsor clients and WCG. My focus was really predominantly on strategic planning, implementation, and just general overall relationship health. So I started my job probably not as illustrious as Andrea, but I began as a pharmaceutical rep 15 plus years ago. And what that gave me was a really great launching off point to get that baseline understanding of what clinical research was, certainly from my training there. But it was a good launching off point to then move into that post-approval space. And so from there on, I've had a career focused on clinical research solutions. But when I was thinking about this question, perhaps more important is kind of the reason why I stay. And that really truly is this insatiable need to fix. And I really do believe that this is an industry where we can do better and we need to do better. And I certainly enjoy working with clients and partners across the industry on ways that we can fix things.
Love that. Insatiable desire to fix. That is a great quote to take away. Lauren, thank you too for being here today. So we're here to talk about the Florence Research Revolution. This was the third offering. It's offered on an annual basis. Andrea, since it's your parent organization, can you share a little bit more about why Research Revolution was started and a little bit more about how it's continued now into its third year?
Absolutely. The Research Revolution really was born out of the desire to bring people across the industry together. And I love how Lauren was saying that, connecting stakeholders. We do that a lot at Florence, and we wanted a venue where everyone could experience the same types of interaction that we get to experience quite often. So it's a unique conference in that there's sponsors, CROs, and sites coming together to analyze problems in the industry, discuss solutions, and network together. That's the goal. And we're pleased that we've been very successful the last few years.
And there's really quite a diversity of topics that are presented. Lots of people engaged in panel discussions. Are there any from this year's conference that really stood out to you?
Oh man, it's always such a, like you said, a diverse list of topics, usually based on what we're hearing are the biggest pain points in the industry. So there were some great sessions on recruitment and engagement, budgets and contracts. Frontier sites was an interesting topic, and sort of like industry capacity and staffing. Also, probably my favorite session was what sites wish sponsors knew. That was a really fun panel. The room was full of sponsors listening. There was a variety of site panelists on the panel, all discussing like, hey, these are ways we could work better together. And to me, that sort of encompasses what the conference is all about. And so I particularly enjoyed that panel.
Yes, you watched those panelists' faces. Did you see any ahas that were pretty apparent on their faces?
From the audience and from the panelists, it's so great to see that connection and realize like, when you bring people together, they can understand each other's viewpoint of a problem or a process or a workflow. And really, we can get through these hurdles. We can get over these challenges if we are all speaking the same language and understanding each other.
Yeah, I mean, just think of the term site activation and the difference that means to a sponsor when all of their checklist has been completed, but yet a site may have a couple more boxes that they have to check off before they actually can enroll a patient. So finding the understanding the common definitions just incredibly important. Lauren, I know this was not your first year for attending the Research Revolution. Tell us a little bit about what you experienced there.
Sure. Yes, so I've had the opportunity to come down to Atlanta for the past 2 years. So what I can certainly say coming into the event, the moment you step through the doors into the foyer to attend the event, it's very clear how much Florence really does love and respect their site relationships. And so just generally, I find it to be a very open and friendly environment, not only to learn, different perspectives. I appreciated that there was also perspectives from the keynote from folks that are outside of the industry specifically, but can provide insights and challenge us to challenge those industry norms and really to have the voice heard. So similar to the panel that Andrea was discussing, right? There really is that opportunity to talk and share in an open environment. And even more so, it's not just talking to talk because you're around key stakeholders who really are change agents in the industry. And so what you're saying, it has meaning and it goes somewhere and it can really be action. So I always find that exciting to be able to walk away from a conference and know that the information shared is going to make change. So definitely.
Any sessions in particular that stood out for you?
Well, I certainly sat in your session, Sandy, and it was interesting to get the perspective of so many different stakeholders across clinical trials, both from the sponsors, from service providers, independent consultants, and just how many considerations and how many barriers there are to clinical research. I think oftentimes we think very US centric, but just all of the different regional considerations. And then all of the different regulatory considerations. So, just having that lens into just really gives you appreciation for how much needs to happen and how much you have to overcome in order to get a drug from preclinical all the way to patient. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah, massive project plans and lots of layers, aren't there?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Andrea, Florence started something called the Site Enablement League some time ago. What's that about?
Very similar mission and vision as Research Revolution, actually. So it was about bringing together change agents. And what a great term, Lauren. Thank you for that. Change agents in the industry across all the different stakeholder groups, bringing them together to discuss problems and challenges and focus on common understanding, common language, and working towards solutions or at least sharing knowledge with the industry. So very, like I said, very similar mission and vision to why we have Research Revolution each year.
And I love the terms that you all select. I think they're very intentional. So the Site Enablement League, that sounds very empowering. And then Research Revolution, any background on how that title was derived?
We have a great marketing team. But truly, I think that's why we're all here, right? Like Lauren said in the beginning, like a desire to fix it. We want a revolution in the industry. We need to fix the problems. We know we can do better. We're all here to move forward. And just revolution is such a powerful word, like you said. So
Definitely attention getting, for sure.
yes, that's right. Yeah. So I'm proud of our marketing team, and I love the terminology for both of these, the Site Enablement League and Research Revolution.
So you keep that focus year round, not just that once a year conference through the Site Enablement League. And there have been a number of working groups that have formed under that Site Enablement League. Could you tell us a little bit more about those and kind of what happens to the content that gets created or the learnings that come about as a result of bringing these stakeholders together?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, the working groups are smaller gatherings within the Site Enablement League. So it might be the executive league members, or they may nominate someone from their organization to participate. The topics are voted on by the league membership, and they're typically things that we all know are problems in the industry. We're all facing challenges with, and we bring those topics forward and ask who'd like to participate in the working group. The goal there is, first of all, to impact the industry, and so that could be through a white paper, through a survey, through a checklist, or a best practices recommendation. So really, the goal is to come together, tackle a problem, figure out if we have recommendations for that problem, and then get those recommendations out into the industry. So far we've had, I don't have the exact count, but we've presented at conferences such as SOCRA, ACRP, CNS, MAGI, SCRS. We have published one peer-reviewed journal article in Contemporary Clinical Trial Communications, and we have several white papers on the Research Revolution website. So, and what I think is important to note about these is, first of all, the topics are nominated by the Site Enablement League members. So they're relevant to everybody who's in the industry, really working in the trenches today. And then secondly, they're not technology or Florence focused. So the goal here is really for industry change agents or industry influence without the constraints of a particular product or technology. So they're focused on education and bringing people together. And I loved how you asked me earlier about the light bulbs going off or the aha moments, because that happens all the time in the working groups where, for example, a site might say something and a sponsor representative in the working group will go, well, I didn't know that was happening. I had no idea. And so bringing people together over the walls, so to speak, really does make a difference in shared understanding. And that's the only way we're going to be able to advance as an industry.
Well, it's actually a very impressive group to be a part of. WCG is a partner to Florence, and as such, participates in some of the working groups and the Site Enablement League. But that partnership extends beyond the Site Enablement League or just attending the Florence Research Revolution. So, Lauren, maybe you could speak a little bit to how our partnership enables us to optimize the site enablement solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. So from a fundamental perspective, the WCG Florence partnership is truly ideal because, I've found, at least in my interactions with Florence over the past 2 years, is that sites are really fundamental to who we have always served. And so not only are our solutions complementary, they're not a me too, but our missions are very aligned. And so because of that, we really do have the pulse on what sites need and the challenges that they face. And we, go back to what I had said earlier, is that we take action. And I love that the Site Enablement League, Andrea, is agnostic, right? Because we're not going to move the needle by working in silos. And I'm pleased to see that the industry is starting to be more open to sharing ideas and sharing technology platforms, connections, because we can't work in a silo. We have to work together. So that's why I see, from a partnership perspective, we're in a really good position. Later on, I can share a little bit about what we have coming forward in terms of our solution. But it's going to be an exciting 2025. So looking forward to sharing more, maybe perhaps a little bit later.
Excellent. Thanks. So, Lauren, I'll stay with you. You work a lot with sponsors, CROs, and you hear a lot of the challenges that they're having. Some of them trying to better understand sites. What are some of the things you're hearing from sponsors about sites?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So the competition at the site level truly feels like it's at an all-time high, right? We look at the stats, right? We've got more trials than ever. We have less physicians and site coordinators to be able to conduct these trials. And so sponsors are really finding the competition even higher. They're even competing amongst themselves at times. And so because the competition is that much higher, we're finding that sponsors are finding that their studies are being passed over. So sites are choosing not to run their trials, especially when a competitive sponsor has a less complex protocol, if they're providing supplementary site support, and if they're just generally easier to work with. And so in that case, being that sponsor of choice, which we hear so often, is becoming harder. But I will say that it continues to be something that is important to sponsors. And so they really are taking a focus on how to improve their site relationships and how they can really start to, they really are listening to their sites and what they need. So, that's one place I would say site contracting continues to be a pain point, simply just the speed at which that can happen. I hear sponsors say, we send it, it goes through the first round, and if it has to go back through another round of changes, we end up on the bottom of the stack. And so site contracting, definitely a pain point. And then I would just say, I don't know if I would say it as a challenge so much as an opportunity, but DE&I is definitely at the forefront of some of the challenges and opportunities that sponsors are facing, and just really how to get started in many cases. There are companies that have taken a really nice leap forward in these efforts, but especially for smaller clients or clients that are, still developing, this is, it's where to begin with DE&I and how to get started. So, those are some of the things that I'm seeing from the sponsor side.
So challenges, clearly they abound, and we're all collectively trying to address what those are. Anything that you hear from sponsors that they're really, holding the sites up and saying, yes, this is where we want to be. Some true successes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So as WCG, we offer solution sets to help improve site relationships and reduce burden. And so I will find that the clients that seem to have the most success are ones that are really providing a high level of engagement with their sites to truly understand what that specific site is facing and what they need and how to remove those barriers. And so whether that's additional resourcing, more streamlined contracting through MSAs, different kinds of templates, streamlined processes, allowing sites to use their own chosen technologies as opposed to just pushing down whatever technology stack that the sponsor would like to use. Those are all the things that I'm finding where I'm hearing that sponsor truly is sponsor of choice, because they're listening and they're actually taking to heart what the sites are feeding and responding in kind.
If I could just plus one that for 1 second, Sandy, to jump in. We just had a presentation this morning at Florence from a site who is talking about their experience with different types of sponsors and different types of studies. The presenter gave several case studies on trials that went well and trials that didn't go well. And engagement was one of the number one reasons that things either went well or didn't. It's like the sponsor answered the phone and we had a direct contact we could talk to, and they listened to us and they heard what we had to say. Versus no one would get back with us and there were long delays, or the person we were speaking with wasn't really very knowledgeable and they didn't have a direct connection. So really that word engagement that you use, Lauren, is exactly resonating with what we hear here.
Yeah, fantastic. And I will say we hear that often. What is our biggest opportunity and biggest challenge? It's communication. And it is shocking sometimes when it comes down to the basics, like answering the phone, getting connected to the right person in order to move things to the next step.
Agreed.
Andrea, obviously you spend a lot of time working with sites. Clearly, technology is being looked at as a means of connectivity. What kinds of other things are you hearing from sites that make Florence kind of have a wider vision of where things can continue to grow and improve?
Well, if I think about the working groups in the Site Enablement League, we're talking a lot about budgets and contracting, which, again, not necessarily an area that Florence is going to invest in technology-wise, but just thinking through, are there workflow steps that are connected to this that we can support? Because this is a huge challenge for our sites. We hear about complexity, we hear about staffing, we hear about turnover. So lots of common themes with what Lauren was just mentioning. And we do try to think through at Florence when we're thinking about supporting sites, what are those connection points from site to sponsor where we have a touch point or could have a touch point or could shorten a touch point, right? So if a document's flowing back and forth, can we streamline that, or can we advance the amount of data that's getting connected through those documents? So we think through those touch points when we're thinking about connectivity from site to sponsor. How can we streamline that? We know, of course, we can't remove humans ever, but what we want to do is make the humans more effective at what they're doing by streamlining the technology. Of course, technology always shows up as a challenge. It's helpful and it's a challenge, right? So we have to thread the needle there on how to make it useful, but not a burden.
Indeed. Well, that is a great segue then to talk a little bit about WCG's recently released Clinical Research Site Challenges report, which I know both you, Andrea, and Lauren have seen. Having looked at the data that came in 2024, it was a little eye-opening because since 2020, the number one issue that sites have identified has been staffing and retention. And generally, when we see staffing and retention as number one, secondly is usually recruitment and enrollment into their trials. But this year, the high-ranking site burden issues changed a little bit. And coming in at the top was the complexity of clinical trials. Now, certainly we've been hearing a lot about that over the past few years. And actually, we just put it in as a survey choice in 2023, where it ranked third with study startup, but this year propelled up to the first place. Recruitment and retention came in second. Third was study startup. And the fourth is where staffing came in. So a little bit of change. And as we looked at the difference between like large academic medical centers versus physician practices or independent sites, there was a little difference. Study startup remaining a challenge at academic medical centers and hospitals. Of course, that including your coverage analysis, budgets, and contracts. Complexity came in second. And then with the independent sites and physician practices, recruitment and retention was number one. But again, complexity still in the top three. So when we hear complexity of clinical trials, number one issue on the mind of sites, and we begin to unpack that, that could mean a number of things. So I guess I'm just interested in your perspectives, whether it's site or sponsor feedback on that issue of complexity and how staffing seems to have maybe not been solved, but does not appear to be the top burden at sites.
The survey results were fascinating, so definitely a recommended read. And I love how the number one and number two problems are related, right? So even though academic medical center said study startup is the biggest challenge and complexity is second, the complexity is leading to increased study startup challenge, right? Especially when you get into coverage analysis and negotiating complex budgets with, for studies that have a lot of complexity. So totally related there. I think what's interesting here is that we hear a lot from sites is that complexity is really multifaceted. So it's in the inclusion-exclusion criteria, especially as we advance in precision medicine, but also in operationalizing the clinical trial. So how many vendors are you using? Is there a CRO running this study? Is there an imaging CRO involved? What different technology do I have to have that's provided to me compared to what I have on my own site? How much training do I have to do for all those different systems and platforms that I'm using? So it's really complexity, I think, from two sides. And so it makes sense to me that it's rising to the top here. It's as medicine advances, as inclusion-exclusion change, but also as we add more visits and more different types of tests to the studies, everything is getting more complex.
So I definitely feel like it mirrors the same challenges that I'm hearing from the sponsor side. And in terms of the protocol complexity, it's interesting because I feel like this is something, when you talk to clinical operations, forever. I haven't been in this industry for, decades, but it's been some time. And I feel like even from the very beginning, clinical operations has always had, bear the burden of taking whatever the clinical development team decides to do, and they have to figure out how to operationalize it, right? And I think a lot of it too is leaning back into the clinical development team and really having a seat at the table to say, like, can this actually be operationalized? Will someone actually sign up for this trial? And so I also want to add the patient voice to that too, right? And we're seeing sponsors doing more of this by by making sure that all of the stakeholders are involved with that protocol design. I actually heard it was at another conference, and I heard one of the sponsors talking about how they'll do mock visits, and they'll actually walk the clinical development team through what it would be like to be a participant at the trial. And I thought that was really a great way of putting some reality around the patient experience and also those who are at the site and have to conduct the trial. So I thought that was interesting. But, again, I think it's something that must get solved. One, because if we're excluding potentially patients that really could use these therapies, sites aren't taking the trials because they're just too hard to recruit or too hard to conduct. And so we have to find a better way and a more streamlined approach to protocol design. I mean, of course, where applicable, but I think, again, we can be doing better here.
Yeah. Patient burden, site burden, all of that taken into consideration. Well, as we're winding down here, again, Andrea, WCG really enjoys the partnership we have with Florence, appreciate being part of the Site Enablement League. Obviously, we had technologies that we're able to interface for supporting sites in their day-to-day operations. But I guess I'll wrap this up with Lauren. What do you see as next for WCG and Florence as we continue to grow our partnership?
Yeah, absolutely. So coming into the new year, we are excited because we are going to start to be integrating our technologies. And first out of that stack will be the development of a workflow that integrates to allow clients to automatically send IRB outcome documents from WCG's IRB submission portal to Florence's eBinders. And so really what this does is it streamlines the workflow, provides consistent documentation in one location, reduces administrative burden, minimizing errors, and really freeing up, I know Andrea mentioned that earlier, right? Freeing up those individuals to really focus on the patients and not be worried about downloading a document from one system just to upload it to another. That is not something that we want to be utilizing very valuable resources to do. So we're very excited about that. And there'll be more to come as we continue to further integrate, but all focused on ways that we can streamline documentation and connecting our systems for a better site experience. And, I think we acknowledge, right, there's not a cure-all for this, but if we can begin to take the chips off the table, we're start to see, movement. But we have to start somewhere, and we're excited to launch this particular application and solution next year.
Outstanding. Again, we are interdependent in this industry, and the more we can find ways to collaborate, reduce site burden, it's all good for research participants and patients in the end. So as we wrap up today, I want to thank you, Andrea and Lauren, for joining me and sharing your insights on the research revolution, our site burden survey. For anyone who has not seen the site burden survey, you can go to our website, which is www.wcgclinical.com, and you can download a copy. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you have any questions, reach out to us. But overall, we hope you found the episode helpful and that you'll join us for future episodes of WCG Talks Trials. Until next time.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of WCG Talks Trials. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast on your preferred listening platform as we continue to explore different areas of the clinical research industry. As always, we encourage you to join in the conversation. Feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for future topics you'd like to hear on the show by visiting us at wcgclinical.com/podcast. We're here to serve as a trusted resource as we work to improve lives and accelerate clinical research together.